For the week of June 9th, changes to the OINP program, interesting articles in the press concerning possible malfeasance in IRCC, really interesting case law concerning substituted valuation and the SUV program, and general comments about the program for this week. I'm Howard Greenberg.
I'm Greenberg Hameed.
And today we've got so much to talk about.
We do.
Okay. First, for those of you who are still engaged in the OINP program, changes are coming. Administrative changes, but they're important changes.
Yes, OINP employer stream was one of the remaining streams that was paper-based. They're moving fully electronic, and it's going to be an employer-based petition where the employer makes the initial submission through a new system that will come out July 2nd.
And only after that occurs can the employee put their profile in.
Correct, that's right.
Okay? And that may mean refiling documentation.
Correct. In fact, the instructions suggest that those that are pending will be withdrawn.
Right.
You have to reapply in the new portal, and we've looked at some of the legislation. We know that there's an integrity process at the PNP. They're trying to streamline their process, and this might be the beginning of making sure that there's checks and balances for applications.
Okay. Amongst the cases in our case law, there's a very interesting case concerning the startup visa program and an interesting provision of the regulations which is not well understood by many practitioners, consultants, and actually clients.
Right.
So we should talk about a substituted evaluation.
Right. In that particular case, the individual, when they filed their application, they didn't meet the language requirements.
Right.
Which you would think is potentially game over.
Right.
When you file an application, you don't meet the regulatory requirements. But in that application, when those concerns were raised, an argument was made using substituted evaluation to suggest that there could be other indicators of their ability to speak English at a sufficient level, particularly their medical experience.
To be more specific, to meet the requirements of the regulation to economically establish in Canada. The court believed that the officer making the decision should have evaluated all of the information available. And interestingly, in substitute evaluation, economic establishment is not limited to the proposed business, but all of the qualifications the individual has and attributes that would contribute to successfully establishing. It's a wonderful safety net when the application goes bad, so to speak, to make the argument.
And that's the key part. You have to make the argument. You
Right.
can't expect the officer to review information. You have to present a coherent argument. Then the officer is obligated to review it and address it. And in this particular case, it seemed like the officer was only looking at the language test, not all the additional information that should be considered.
When do you think that argument should be made?
Well, I would make it personally at the time that I see any potential deficiency when I'm filing the application.
And when's the second bite at the apple?
Well, before a procedural fairness letter, or if a procedural fairness letter is issued.
Right. The officer certainly has a responsibility and obligation to consider it if the discussion is in the response to the
Right.
procedural fairness letter.
I guess on that note, if you have filed an application and you're concerned about whether you have met those requirements, you should seek counsel because you may be able to proactively respond
Right.
before you are in a position where you have to address a PFL.
Right. You know, Naman, every once in a while an article is published which, I don't know, makes you feel a little uneasy. We've included an article in this week's edition concerning malfeasance at IRCC. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yes, I mean, it was a report. IRCC has produced information where there were officers that have been accessed by employees asked to fast-track applications
Right.
or look the other way. And to your point, generally, IRCC, we may not always agree with their decisions, but we've always felt very comfortable with the integrity of the process. So this was a little alarming and unusual that there could be this type of action happening.
But we suspect isolated. I've been doing this for a number of years. This is the first time I've seen any suggestion of malfeasance.
Correct, and IRCC also gave credibility to whistleblowers that brought this to the attention of the officials.
Interesting. Anything else in this edition that strikes your fancy?
A couple. Let's round off a little bit. There was some information in the Times of India talking about the global talent stream, comparing different jurisdictions around the world and suggesting that Canada might be the ideal location to use the global talent stream to process applications for IT workers.
And of course, you're in agreement.
I love the program, but
I
recently,
see.
I would say you have to select appropriately. The unemployment rate's very high, and I
Right.
found IRCC and ESDC officers in the global talent stream have a very high expectation of your labor market commitments as an employer.
Right.
And it's a tighter review, so not as easy as that article suggested.
I see. Employers have to do more to make the same officials as comfortable as they were a couple of years ago.
And they have to meet their commitments upon review
Right.
with strong evidence as well.
Right.
The other one I thought was interesting that we should talk about is we see their new pilots in Sudbury, new immigration pilot.
Right.
And there are two streams to that. One is a small pilot for Francophone speakers.
Right.
The other for rural.
Right.
We looked at about 500 spots, and they're kind of smart in their design. For either one of those categories, they picked 5 industries that you have to be operating in.
Right.
What does that mean for the rest of the programs when we see, I think, out in the Maritimes, they got another 1,500
Right.
spots?
So what's the moral of that story? I think the problem with individuals who don't understand Canada very well, prospective candidates, is that they think the center of the universe is either Toronto or Vancouver or Calgary or Edmonton. But in fact, these rural communities have their own programs with capacity, with the ability to have these approvals issued. And so the level of investigation that should be conducted by these individuals should be a lot more detailed. They should be discussing with their advisors, is there somewhere I can go in Canada that wants me?
Right. And if you think about it as a new business, if you've set up in one of those locations, housing costs will be a lot better.
Right.
There's less competition, less traffic. So there might be a pitch in a business sense of thinking about some of these areas to grow your new operation.
In fact, you might really want to live there. That's ImmPulse for this week. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions about how to qualify if you think that your application is in trouble, or if you just want to have some general knowledge as to how to set up your application for the future. We're here for you. Okay, hold on. My shirt, I should do it up. I don't want too much hair to show my chest.
I don't think that's a problem for you.
Could be. Okay, let him do the intro, okay? Okay, fine. Okay, okay, fine. I thought somebody should take charge. I could feel weakness.